joined today by
J.R. Romano.
Hello, everybody. It's J.R. Romano with the Connecticut Republican Party. Thank you for tuning in. As always, if you're listening, please subscribe. Fun topics to talk about today. I think we have a lot of problems here in the state of Connecticut, and I really want to stay focused on our elected officials here and how our elected officials behave, particularly how the Democrat Party's behaving. But what I find so fascinating is the fact that the Democratic Party for 2 years have been really pushing the narrative of this collusion, talking about it as though they have the facts of collusion and the impeachment and all these things. And now that this whole thing is kind of like sputtered out and not only was there no collusion, but there was no tampering, there was no obstruction. These are all things that the Democrats and frankly, I really hope that we can move past this and start to actually focus on policy and start talking about how the U.S. economy is booming. The Connecticut economy is not, as we found out, right, that we lost jobs at the beginning of 2019. We've already continued our failing economy here, and it's because, frankly, Ned Lamont is no different than Dan Malloy. And in fact, I think Ned Lamont's worse. I think that he's this kind of like smoother character. Like he seems like a nice guy, but meanwhile, he's got both his hands in your pockets and he's stealing your dinner, right? So I think when you look at what's happening in the state of Connecticut, you see more job loss. You see them calling for billions in tax hikes. You know, it's the exact opposite what's happening nationally. And I think that's why it's really hard for people to understand. And they think that somehow when we talk about the national economy's growth here in Connecticut, it's almost not real, right? Because we're not feeling that growth. We're not feeling that across, the wages rising across the country. So, of course, the Democrats want to focus on everything. And I just want to touch base on something that kind of bothered me. And not from the standpoint of what the conversation is, right? I don't want to get into a debate about, the Second Amendment and what Dick Blumenthal and Chris Murphy are doing. But what I'm really concerned about is that with a snap of a finger, they decided to have a roundtable in New Britain with high school students during school hours. So there's a couple questions that and the only reason that I bring this up is I find it really fascinating because there's a group of parents out, and I think it's California or it might be even the Midwest, where they're suing the school district for forcing students into these political situations. It's particularly wrong right now in the environment that we're in, where you have 2 U.S. senators and a congresswoman forcing this roundtable discussion about the Second Amendment, about the Constitution, about all these policies that they want without having any other voice in the room, all for the fact that they can get in front of the paper and they can talk to reporters and push their narrative. And they're using these kids as props. And I think the worst part about it is, and this is what I would say, like anything else, if these politicians are going to continue to use children as political props, the very least they can do is send a permission slip home to their parents. Allow the parents the right to choose whether or not they're going to be in a room with Chris Murphy or Dick Blumenthal. And right now that's not happening. And I have to tell you, if we had a Republican who decided to have a forum and in the middle of the school day with a group of 15 or 20 students and talk about immigration reform and bring in the angel moms, the Democrats would go bananas. They would go crazy. And that's kind of what I'm saying is that in the environment that we're in and more politicians, personally, I think it's on the Democratic side of the aisle, are stripping rights away from parents. Telling parents and kind of cutting off that idea that somehow what the school tells you or what we tell you as politicians are more valuable and more important than what you're learning from your own parents. And I hope anyone listening to this, if you're on a school board, I think we should start passing resolutions locally demanding that if a politician comes and wants to talk to kids, they got to be a permission slip. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think giving control back to the kids is a great idea because they're abusing their incumbency, their right as an elected official to push policies unquestioned and undebated to a group of young people. It's not right. In fact, we read about these stories from, the Communist Manifesto, right? You got to get the youth. So it's getting a little scary. And I think the more that we interject parental rights, I think the better we're all going to be. So that was kind of what I was a little annoyed about that. I wanted to touch base about it on that particular issue because, things have not gotten any more sane in Hartford. So I wanted to touch on that federal issue, some of our federal candidates. There's just been so many interesting things over the last week. My favorite was Hartford. The politicians in Hartford celebrated the fact that they got a bond upgrade, but their status is still junk. They got a $500 million bailout from the state of Connecticut, and all they managed was a half of an upgrade. And they also lost $1 million, it's just one of these things where they're just trying to find any good news in the state of Connecticut to try to sell that somehow things are back on the path to recovery. And they're not. And the reason they're not is because you have elected officials like, I don't know, Cathy Osten. Cathy Osten literally, and I want you to listen to this clip. Here, play it.
How many times have we taken money out of the special transportation fund and moved it into the general fund? Well, we've not done that. We diverted some money from going into that, which is different. We diverted some money from going into that, which is different.
She literally says they never raided the special transportation fund. Now, while technically correct, she is 100% correct. They never raided the fund. However, what they did do was they diverted I don't have to repeat it. You heard it. You heard it straight from Senator Austin's mouth. They diverted the money. So essentially, and the two things that come to mind is what our Democrat politicians in Hartford have done is they've basically robbed the armored car or the armored truck before it got to the bank. So therefore, it is not stealing. I wonder if they apply this logic to other things, right? I mean, in my head, I'm like, okay, so we raided the pantry, so there was no food to cook dinner, but it's not our fault that everyone is starving. I mean, it is the most bizarre line of thought and reasoning. And frankly, the reason they're using this type of doublespeak and this type of rhetoric is because they don't have any real justification for their failures outside of the fact that Democrat policies don't work. So they just doublespeak and they lie and they manipulate the facts. Here's a fact. The state of Connecticut, the gas tax, which was meant to fund our roads and transportation issues in our state, never made it into the fund. Don't let the Democrats try to tell you that somehow we don't have the revenue. We do. They took it. They stole it. They diverted it, whatever word you want to use, for things other than our roads. And now what they'll claim is they don't have enough money to fix the roads that they should have fixed 10 years ago. And this is the best part. What did they divert it for? I mean, that's the other thing that I find so fascinating. Because we know what they didn't use the money for. They didn't use the money to shore up any pension issues. They didn't use the money to shore up any long-term liabilities or pay down debt. They used it for operating expenses. At least that's what I can tell from the way that I look at this. So that's what makes it even better. I would almost argue, my mother's a teacher. She's a retired teacher. If you were to say, you know what, we had to divert money from the Special Transportation Fund in order to shore up our pension liabilities for teachers and state employees. You know what? Maybe I'd accept that. Maybe I'd say 1 or 2 years where we were taking this money, we were diverting this special transportation money to try to shore up some long-term liabilities. Maybe that would help and pay down some debt, get a better credit rating. But that's not what they used it for. That's the thing that is so disturbing. They used it for short-term things. They used it for operating expenses, a vast majority of it. And so the problems mounted within our long-term liability and debt, and the roads got worse. So now what they're doing is they're literally, I remember talking to someone, it's easier to tell people the list of things that they are not trying to tax. We're talking bicycle helmets. We're talking cats. We're talking every service that you can possibly think of. They are trying to get their hands in. And it's all about revenue. We are no longer residents of the state to the Democratic Party. We are simply revenue sources. We are entities to just suck money out of, to divert our money to. I mean, that's literally how we are viewed by the Democratic Party. Don't let them fool you. You are nothing more than a revenue source. Revenue, revenue, revenue. Not once have they talked about cutting. Not once. No cuts. And this is the best part. They know. See, this is what always makes me laugh. They know, Democrats in this state recognize that taxes actually are problematic. They know that they're bad. So what they do is they pick and choose when they pull that card. I'm going to play this clip for you here.
You spoke a little bit about the sugar tax and trying to change behavior. Could you explain that a little bit more clearly?
The tax is on a sugar-sweetened beverage, and so additional cost that a consumer would have to incur, the research indicates that one would stop and think about whether or not they would like to incur that cost. And so that is the basic premise behind the proposal.
So here's a Democrat. Here's someone within the Lamont administration arguing that taxing sugary drinks will change behavior. Literally admits that a tax on something which means people buy less of it. So, and all along I thought they didn't understand economics. I thought Democrats were really bad at math. But no, they get it. They just don't care. That's a big difference. Logically, you could apply that same attitude, that same premise in regards to taxing something will make people do less of it to everything. So that fundamentally tells me that they understand that taxation is bad, but they don't care. So they're going to say, okay, in this particular case, we're going to tax this. We're going to tax sugary drinks because we want people to do less of it. Well, what about a business entity tax? What about sales tax? What about, income tax? These are all things that deter. Taxes are designed to generate revenue so the government can operate. But what's happened in our government is that Democrats have become beholden to the special interests, the unions in particular, to feed itself. And so now they play games with, well, we're taxing this because we wanted people to do less of it. But in this particular case, we're taxing it because we need the money. I mean, it's completely illogical, and it's all about political pandering and jargon and doublespeak. And this proves to me that the Democrats actually they know what they're doing. They just don't care. They don't care about your family. They don't care what they're doing to the state of Connecticut. What they care about is their party and staying in power. That's all they care about. They don't care about you. They don't care about families in the state at all. They really don't. I mean, here's my favorite. This is the new one. They want to create a new tax, and they want to tax our electric bills for an earth bank. And I'll bet any amount of money this earth bank, which is designed, probably has some whimsical ambition of reducing Connecticut's carbon footprint, whatever it may be, will never be used for what its stated goal is. It'll be rated to fund operating expenses. It will not be used as an earth bank. Doesn't that sound, I mean, it sounds so simple, right? Well, we're going to tax, a kilowatt hour or whatever it may be for an earth bank. And none of that money will be spent for what its stated goal. None of it. $0. Because if they're willing to raid the special divert money from the special transportation fund, which is meant to protect us from crumbling bridges. You know how easy it would be for them to raid the earth bank? It's a joke. It's a joke. It really, really is a joke. And I have to give credit to State Representative Laura Devlin, who masterfully, just beautifully dissected and destroyed Senator Osten on that whole diverting money from the, here, I want you to take a listen to this. She was amazing.
I just want to clarify for the record to your point regarding any funds withheld or swept from the Special Transportation Fund, that in full year 2014, all $172.8 million in scheduled general fund revenue sharing funding for the STF was diverted before it entered the fund. In addition, a direct sweep of STF's cumulative balance occurred, sweeping $76.5 million from the STF. In full year 15, all $172.8 million in scheduled general fund revenue sharing funding for the STF was diverted before it entered the fund. In full year 2016, $37.5 million in scheduled sales tax revenue funding for the STF was diverted before it entered the fund. In full year 2017, $50 million in scheduled sales tax revenue funding for the STF was diverted before it entered the fund.
It doesn't make you proud to be a Republican when you listen to that, right? It is so, I mean, when we have state reps like Representative Devlin who she has been a champion of this anti-toll stuff because she recognizes and beautifully lays out the case of how disingenuous and dishonest the Democrats are being about that special transportation fund. I mean, it was great. The other one I want to give a special shout out to was Representative Devin Carney. And try not to, whatever you're listening to this on, try not to throw or smash whatever it is after what I'm about to tell you. Representative Devin Carney. I can't even believe I'm about to say this. So what he exposed was how Democrats were carpooling, and yet each individual Democrat legislator was filing for reimbursements for mileage. So basically, one car, 4 reps. All 4 reps had put in for mileage reimbursement. That's one thing. And the other was the elected officials. Well, I'll let Devin explain. Representative Carney does a great job. Listen.
Section 4, subsection E, exempt from tolls. Can you give me an example of what I see vehicles used by state police, fire department vehicles. Those are explicitly defined, or one would have an understanding of what those are. Can you give me, I guess, what should we believe to be a state vehicle through you?
Again, I would use that as the law enforcement, emergency personnel, ambulances, things of that nature.
Okay, because those are separate. It says state vehicles, then it says vehicles used by state police, but not within that definition. Because I guess, trying to figure out whether an elected state official who is a passenger in a state vehicle would be exempt from a toll. I guess that's the question. Do you know if that would be the case?
It's not the persons in the car, it's who the car is registered to.
Okay, so, I guess I know that when Governor Malloy left office in January, one of the things he said was he kind of needs to learn how to drive again because he didn't really drive much. So I know that Governor Lamont, in his campaign ads, made it seem like he was driving his vehicle to and from the Capitol from Greenwich. He was going to stay in Greenwich some nights. But do you know whether Governor Lamont is currently being driven from Greenwich to the Capitol in a state vehicle or in his own personal vehicle through you?
I do not know. I don't have the luxury of driving with the governor daily.
Okay, because where I'm going with this, I guess one of my concerns with this carve-out in here, and I understand where it may make sense, but, I know there are a lot of people that go to and from work. My stepsister, for example, who is middle class, she's a teacher. She lives in Orange. She drives to Darien every day. That's where she works. She works at a Darien school, a public school in Darien. Estimated under this toll bill and the other ones, she looks at about probably at least $1,000 a year that she will have to pay to get to and from work. She doesn't have she's not making 6 figures. It's not a big fancy job. It's a good job. She does good work. But that's going to take away from things like she said, funding, spending money on her kids so they can play Little League, go to summer camp, things like that. And that sort of just puts a bad taste in my mouth that we may be exempting the governor while he would be in a state vehicle, or whoever else, another constitutional officer, who may or may not be using that state vehicle for specific state reasons, while they would be exempt, but my stepsister wouldn't. So I think that's something that whether this legislation moves forward needs to be addressed. I just can't imagine that a situation where the governor coming from Greenwich to Hartford would be exempt from paying a toll, but the middle class residents of the state wouldn't.
Yeah. So basically, what this boils down to is that they're going to implement tolls. These Democrats are going to implement tolls and then not pay them. And it goes back to what I say constantly. And I almost feel like it's getting derivative. I keep highlighting this. And we as people who just want to save the state, we have to start communicating in a way to our friends and family. And I've mentioned this before. We have to tell them in very simple, not aggressive, not over the top. Look, Stop believing the Democrats care about you. Here's a prime example. You have a Republican legislature standing up against benefits that he could certainly take advantage of. Representative Carney could certainly carpool with another legislature and then put in for the reimbursement, which, by the way, gets calculated into their pension account too. It's bizarre, but it's also something that a little perk that our elected officials get because they don't get enough. And he's standing up against this. He's standing up against the reimbursement that they would get for tolls, that they wouldn't have to pay tolls. They're sticking us with the bill. It's astounding to me. And it is quite frustrating, but we as a party cannot give up. We have to keep working. We have to keep fighting. Because and frankly, what we have to understand is there's no cavalry coming over the hill. There's no one coming to bail us out. It is on us to stand up for the hardworking families, for the hardworking seniors, for the hardworking people of the state. We got to do it. Because the Democrats, and I've said this for a long time, they're not going to do it. They're not going to give up. No, what they recognize is that they're alienating people. So they're just trying to create new voters, like, 16-year-olds, right? Because they know that they've lost lots of hardworking people in the state that'll never vote for them again. So they've moved on. Now they're going to charge you, right? They're going to tax you. They're going to take your money, but they moved on from caring about you and your family. I'm J.R. Romano with the Connecticut Republican Party. Hope you enjoyed it.